Hey, as we're doing, hope you're having a fantastic day. It is Monday, November 17th, and I'm still in the corner of my office right now. If you haven't noticed, this is slightly different than my normal setup, and it's because having some repairs done to my house. They were supposed to get done today because I am in the midst of selling my house. It's already sold, so no, none of you guys can buy it, and I will be moving around the end of December. That's when the closing period is. Bought a new house going from the Charlotte area to Bismarck, North Dakota. That's where I will be living as a bit of a life update. So that's why I'm in the corner of my room, my office right now, and not in my normal recording area. But yeah, so that's also why I have to do another slop stream. I've wanted to recently, and this is a thought I've been having a lot, because what I've noticed is that for a lot of content creators, this is going to be my little preface before I actually start answering questions. But yes, I will be answering questions. So for a lot of content creators, I've kind of noticed this unfortunate trend where once they making YouTube videos their job, or writing articles or whatever else, they kind of start getting into this cycle of click seeking, right? They're trying to seek clicks. Seeking clicks is good if it's for the purpose of wanting to get your ideas out there, but subordinating the actual ideas and content that you're creating just to what you think is going to be popular, that's extremely dangerous. So I've been trying to, as much as I can, I want to make everything that I do as substantive as possible. Here and there, yeah, sure, I'll do a review video or I'll do a Q&A or something like that. But I try to keep them to a minimum, and I try to only do them when I think that it's going to be somehow helpful to you guys. So yeah, doing a little bit of a shift. If you guys haven't noticed over the last few weeks, I've been trying to be very, very intentional about that. So yes, so actually, and this is a good question. This is another thing that I wanted to bring up. I will be doing not a second Hassan Gideon stream, but it's going to be just me, and it's going to be going over a lot of the stuff in Leviticus, how the old law actually reveals a lot about the New Testament. It reveals a lot about the gospel. It reveals a lot about the Christian moral life, and it reveals objects of faith, and sometimes in even more extensive way than simple mentions from the New Testament or the various different areas in which the New Testament talks about it. So I'm going to be going over Leviticus, going into a lot of stuff, very important stuff, very interesting stuff. So be on the lookout for that. It's going to be, I think, the day before Thanksgiving is when it's going to release. So, oh, no, it's going to be the day after Thanksgiving it's going to release. So be on the lookout for that. I'm going to be writing a lot of my notes on my Substack. I've been doing a lot of Substack writing recently. So I hope you guys have enjoyed that. Make sure I put the link below. But if you want to subscribe to that, I'm going to be putting on a lot of notes about various different topics when it comes to the New Testament. Where do I look? Does it look normal if I look at the camera, or am I supposed to look above, below? I don't know where to look when I'm on my laptop. I haven't been on my laptop in such a long time. Okay. So anyways, yeah, I'm just going to get into these questions. I didn't reach out to Minion Thomas to save some of the other questions, so I'll try to do my best to grab some of these questions as much as I want. Okay. So first question, this is the one that I wanted to treat first. I know it's not a super chat, but I just think it's a really good question because a lot of people ask me about this, and I wanted to give a good answer because I was thinking about this a lot recently in reference to how we actually articulate this. Because first and foremost, we're going to have to think about, because penal substitutionary atonement, it's talking about substituting another person and giving a punishment to that person, right? So if we're going to even think about the atonement and its relationship to a sort of penal or forensic aspect, we're going to kind of have to think about what sin is and what punishment is, because there's two aspects to the effect of sin, right? One, sins, that is, they make an act of the will or they omit an act that they should have of the will, and it's somehow an act which is, averse to God, or somehow directing to creatures in a way that is inordinate, right? So there's the act of sin. Now, the act of sin, this has two effects in the soul. One, it actually gives a certain sort of malice in the soul. So there's a certain disorder. We're ordered towards the thing, right? We're ordered away from God. There's a certain disorder that's in the soul. And this is called the sort of maculum of sin, or the stain of sin, right? And then also next to this is actually like a quality in the soul. Like the soul, something, think of it like dirt gets on the soul, right? There's a quality in the soul from the act of sin. And beside that, there's actually the establishment of a relation. This is kind of similar to, although not entirely identical to like penal law, right? In a society, is actually by the sinful act, one does not only, have an effect of the soul, the dirt on the soul. There's also another effect, and this is the effect of an obligation to punishment. This is actually a certain relation that we have. We have a relation to punishment. So when it comes to our redemption from Christ, what Christ does is there's two effects of Christ's atonement. There's an ascending effect and a descending effect, right? So when Christ is on the cross, there's two things that happen. One, he offers himself to God as a propitiation. And him offering himself to God as a propitiation, what does a propitiation do? It renders somebody propitious. I think that's how you pronounce it. Basically, it renders somebody to look favorably upon you. So even though you have sinned against them, right, and even though you have an obligation to punishment, that person forgives you, right? There's a certain satisfaction of that happens, right? There's a forgiveness on that part. So this is the obligation due to punishment is forgiven. But then you also have the stain. And this is where I think actually a lot of Protestant articulations fundamentally go wrong, is they kind of confuse these two aspects of sin, right? Because there is a sort of non-reciprocal relationship between the stain of sin and the obligation to punishment. Because the stain of sin is a certain foundation for the obligation to punishment. I'll give you an analogy. It's similar to how the act of generation made me a father to my son. So there's the act of generation, right? And then there is the relation towards my son. So you can have, right? You can have if you have an act of generation, this is correlative with having the sort of relation of fatherhood to my son. You cannot have, it is logically impossible for me to generate and not be a father, right? So in a similar way, and this is kind of an imperfect analogy, but in a similar way, it is logically impossible for me to have the stain of sin, right? And not to have an obligation to punishment which corresponds to this. It would be unjust. It would be unjust. There would be an injustice if there was a stain of sin that was not punished, right? But the opposite is not true. The opposite is not true at all. So somebody can actually, repent and change their ways and actually heal, scrub off that dirt, heal actually the disorder in their soul, but they would still actually be liable to punishment. And in a similar way, if you had somebody who's a murderer and they went and they murdered somebody, they're still civilly liable to go to prison. So you can have that person who murders and then they just kind of stop and they go away, but they still have the obligation to punishment. So there's like a non-reciprocal relationship, right? If somebody murders, they have the obligation to punishment for that, but just because they repent doesn't mean that there needs to be mercy and needs to, rid them of the obligation to punishment. There actually needs to be forgiveness for this. So in a similar way, we can kind of think about the sort of twofold effect of the atonement. So in one way, we actually have the descending mediation of Christ, right? From Christ to us, there's sanctifying grace. Sanctifying grace comes into the soul. It's sort of habit which elevates the soul. It comes down to us. These graces flow forth from Christ, from his pierced side, and these cleanse us from the stain, from the dirt of sin, right? But just because we've been cleansed from the stain and from the dirt of sin does not actually mean that we don't have an obligation to punishment. And this right here is actually why, there's a great necessity to mercy. There's a great necessity to mercy in the final judgment, because yes, we may be cleansed by the graces of Christ. We may actually, somewhat keep the law, but when it comes to our past acts, when it comes to those acts which are not in conformity to the law, those still deserve punishment. There's an obligation to punishment. So there needs to be a merciful forgiveness on the part of God when it comes to the soul that has fallen into sin, right? So this merciful forgiveness on the part of God, this is brought about through the mediation of Christ. So Christ has propitiated the Father. Christ also offers himself as a loving sacrifice to the Father. This is, in the words of, the Old Testament, this is a sweet smelling aroma, right? This is a sweet smelling aroma to God. And from the displeasure that he has to our sin, it goes from that to now that he's actually pleased with us, because he's pleased with that sacrifice which Christ has offered. So this is a propitiation to God, and therefore that obligation to punishment is now finally forgiven, right? So this is absolutely essential, and this is at least my understanding is as clearly the doctrine of Saint Thomas Aquinas. This is exactly how I read Saint Thomas, and it makes complete sense to me. Out of the nature of sin, the atonement, the nature of grace, the nature of forgiveness and mercy, all of these things come together. When we are considering sin and the atonement in this light. So yeah, we have all of that, and then now we kind of have to ask the question: okay, well, where does a sort of penal character to Christ come? Like, where does this come into the fray? So when it comes to Christ, Christ obviously, he did not have this obligation to punishment, right? Because the obligation to punishment, just as fatherhood requires an act of generation, right? The obligation to punishment requires the stain of sin, which follows from the act of sin. So Christ did not have the obligation to punishment. In this way, Christ was not somehow guilty or a sinner at all. That would be actually quite blasphemous in order to, think of it in this way. But really, we can speak about it in a different way. He is under punishment in a different way, not because Christ has somehow sinned and, obligated himself to punishment, but because he has voluntarily took upon himself the punishment that we would be under, had we sinned, had we died in this state. So in this way, yeah, we can talk about the character of the atonement as penal, but it's not from any sort of necessary obligation which flows from an act of sin. It's actually from a voluntary taking on of his character as the suffering servant, as the sacrificial lamb, who will be offered up to the Father and be a pleasing aroma in order for him to show mercy to us and to forgive our sins. So I hope that's helpful. These things get really complicated, when we're trying to think through this. But I feel like what's most helpful if we kind of start from these first principles of the nature of sin, grace, etc., and kind of work on from there. And everything in my mind, at least, everything kind of just fits into place. So sorry for the long answer, and I apologize for everybody else who's asking questions who I won't be able to reach because of this. But I hope that this was very helpful for everybody. Okay, so question from James. Father Ripperger says it is sinful to watch a movie with profanity because the actor has to commit the sin rather than merely simulate it. Thoughts? Yeah, that's a good question. I don't necessarily think so. I mean, I would be open to hearing arguments to the contrary. But when it comes to acts of simulation in which there is contextually understood not to deceive people, that's obviously sinful. And St. Thomas talks about sinful simulation. But simulation, which is basically the mere repetition, whether in writing, artistically, etc., of another person, it's clearly understood contextually not to actually involve, the offense which is being simulated. So, for example, if you if you replicated the the blasphemy of another person by writing it down, which sacred scripture itself does when it records the blasphemy of others, or if you were, for example, like a lector who was reading, these passages when you were reading them in church or something like that, in some way of sort of repeating it in front of other people, so they're able to understand the story at hand. That is not somehow simulating it in a sinful way. I think the same would probably go for. It would go for other artistic representations, like for example, to simulate a murder or to simulate, sexual assault or something like that in a an artistic context is not necessarily sinful. It doesn't involve somehow engaging in the act, if obviously contextually it's understood that that's not which is going on. Okay, Ignatius of Antioch, thank you for the super chat. I appreciate it. Okay. I want to kind of answer this question on the Ordinary and Universal Magisterium, but I'm going to put a fork in it, and hopefully I'm going to be able to get to it before I have to go, because I feel like a lot of people they kind of misunderstand the Ordinary and Universal Magisterium, and I think it would be helpful to go over that. Okay, so wouldn't dogs be saved since they have invincible ignorance and don't inherit all sin from Adam? Okay, thank you for the super chat. Were the apostles saved because even if they did not publicly believe in papal infallibility, they had implicit faith and were invincibly ignorant of it? No, I actually think that all the apostles had explicit faith in all of the mysteries, conclusions, etc. So I would suggest reading Father Sola. Father Francisco Marin Sola, his Evolution of Catholic Dogma. He talks about this. I can't remember which section, but if you control F and you something like the starting point of dogmatic evolution or something like that, it goes over the apostles and God, and then the original church. We're talking about, if we were to speak in the categories of implicit faith, they wouldn't be invincibly ignorant of it, because invincible ignorance occurs with those things in which it's necessary by necessity of precept to believe in. So we would more so speak in the category of implicit faith. But when it comes to the starting point of dogmatic process, dogmatic evolution, or development of doctrine, whichever term you want to use for it, we're actually talking about the original Christians who first received public revelation. We're not talking about the apostles who were the divine legates appointed for the preaching of public revelation. Well, no, God does not have causes. Causes imply imperfection. So only in a very, very broad sense, in the same way as which we would use the word principle. Like, that's how the Greeks will use the word cause, is simply that which flows from another. But no, God does not have, God is not within the genus of the four causes. Oh my goodness. Dude, religious-y stuff, gonna crash out. You got to fit it all in one. Because I'll explain this to you. This was like, so you sent this 15 minutes ago. Okay, I'll explain how this works from my end, like from what I see while I'm streaming. So in my end, all super chats get starred. That's why it's so easy for me to answer them, because they get starred and they get set aside. So I see your chat right there, and I can bring it up, and then I read it, so I don't have to go and scroll through the chat. But if you put them on two messages, then I just can't see the whole thing. And now I have to go and scroll through the whole chat to find the second one. But, dude, you're asking about Chile and Chileans and wife loving. I don't know if you're trolling me or not, but yeah, I'm just sorry, man. You should have just included it in one chat. I can't do this part 1 of 2 stuff. Okay, RCS. Wouldn't Cayetanus be correct on baptism of intention for Christian infants, given St. Thomas's commentary on the Creed, and how uncircumcised babies were saved? No. Okay. So there was a certain dispensation in the old law. And in the dispensation of the old law, the way in which the uncircumcised children of Christian parents were saved, or even, and this is another thing the authors bring up, Duranzo brings this up, also, according to the same reasoning, the way in which sons were to be saved within the 8 days. Because with baptism, you can apply baptism the same day of birth. You can do it the next day of birth. With circumcision, they had to wait until the 8th day. So there was obviously a certain danger when it came to the way in which the Old Covenant had the sacrament of initiation. So the way in which the sacrament of initiation worked is could not be done to girls, and it could only be done to boys up until the 8th day. So when it comes to those members of the covenant community, what was appointed in order to overcome this deficiency was that, there was some sort of public profession of faith and some sort of sign, or public profession of belief of some sort, in a prayer, a blessing. Like that was the appointed means in order to overcome those deficiencies. But now in the Christian dispensation, these are not applicable anymore. The only means which has been applied for infants is baptism. Why is David Wood such a scumbag? Okay. So this whole I don't know why I highlighted that one. This whole controversy makes no sense, okay? Because this literally makes everybody involved look bad. So, like, one, and I promise I'll keep this to like 2 minutes. I just need to give the thoughts real quick, right? Make it all controversial, make everybody all upset. I'm joking about that. One, it's like, okay, Sam Shamoon and David Wood, they were friends for a long time, and there's no reason to believe that David Wood is somehow lying about what Sam Shamoon's wife told him. And, there's obviously, it's of other, witnesses witnessing to similar things. So it's not like it would be rash for one to say, like, yeah, it's believable that these horrific things happened. It's very believable. But on the one hand, like, yeah, okay, that makes Sam Shamoon look very bad. It's awful. We kind of knew these things already. And the people who are followers of Sam, they're not really going to just leave Sam behind because of this, because they kind of already knew this. Or at least, they've already not believed the first round. So why would they believe the second rounds? Okay. But then beside this, it just makes David Wood look awful. Okay, David Wood mentions, his escapades with minors. Okay, what the heck? Why are you mentioning that? One hand. And on the second hand, he's admitting that he knew all this about Sam and yet continued to do like public ministry stuff with Sam for years after. It's so idiotic. Also, he's a Zionist. Okay, and that's the worst part about him. Okay, so is it a mortal sin to talk to an anime girl AI? Okay, thank you for the super chat. No message. Okay, so he did add a second, the two of two. Loving the kids because that pleases husband, loving kids because of husband to make husband happy. Husband is pleased by happy kids, so wife loves them to please husband. I don't know what this is. I don't know what this is, what this question is supposed to ask. Okay. Do you take commissions for custom videos? I was thinking about something like Mary being sinless. Um, no. I mean, you can request it, and I'll like request what you want. Like I usually patrons will request stuff, and sometimes I do it, sometimes I don't. I don't know. I just feel kind of weird about that because if you request a video and I think it's like a really bad idea and won't actually be helpful to people, like it just feels kind of weird to just like take money for. It's one thing to like take money people want to support, what I have to do, or like people super chat and I could just choose to say like, oh, I think your question's stupid, and I just go on, or I don't think it's helpful and go on. But it's another thing to just say like, oh, I think this is a bad idea and I don't think it's going to be really helpful for people, but I'm just going to do it anyways because somebody hired me. It just feels kind of weird. It's like one thing. Yeah. So no, I mean, you could ask, but no promises. Can I listen to my spiritual director's advice on matters of conscience if it's not laid out to me as a command? Can you listen to it? Yeah, why wouldn't you be able to? Kind of confused why this would be a question. Okay, so without spoiling your video, what are some good sources for finding trustworthy commentaries on the less often covered Old Testament books? I've been looking for ones on Numbers and Ezra and Nehemiah particularly. Okay, this is a really good question. I mean, my main advice is that at least for the Catholic tradition, we have a number of different authors who did treat, commentaries on the entire Bible. So you have like the Gloss Ordinaria, obviously you have Hugh of Saint Cher, you have the Franciscan whose mind is whose name is currently escaping me right now. You have Blessed Denis of Carthusian, you have Cayetanus, although Cayetanus, you have Lapide. I'm sure there's others that I'm not thinking of right now, but basically, like for the lesser commented on books, like I would just suggest kind of just strapping in and reading authors like that. Those are gonna be the most helpful places where you're gonna find good commentary. Okay, so IVF question. My wife and I utilized IVF prior to conversion, and we have 11 frozen embryos. I'm sorry to hear that. What would be a proper course of action in keeping with the church's teaching on IVF? Thanks. Okay, so one, I'm very sorry that happened to you, and that I hope that you found forgiveness and have overcome any sort of uh, bad effects of those sorts of sins. I know they're particularly harmful. So there's kind of two courses of action, and neither of them have been definitively spoken on by the church. There's one that gets recommended a little bit more, one that gets recommended a little bit less. First, some are of the opinion that we simply let the embryos perish, unfreeze them, and that's sort of the course of action that we should follow. And there's others that believe in a sort of like mindset that we should just implant them, even in the course of what's called embryo adoption. It's controversial. There's some Catholic authors who are for it, some against it. The church tends against it. But in that course of action, it would either be the mother of the embryos, or it would be somebody else, even in that case. So, you would have to just consult a prudent confessor and director, and you should, follow what they have to say on this matter. Do dogs have invincible ignorance? I reading Vatican II and watching Catholic Christian vid. It seems like dogs can get into heaven with RZ and PCUSA. Okay, thank you for the super chat. You're probably going through this before. Can you explain St. Augustine's view of unbaptized infant torments without concupiscence being sin? Good question. Well, there's a certain okay. So everybody agrees that there's a certain because remember what I mentioned earlier, the macula, right? There's a certain guilt of original sin that everybody affirms, right? There's a certain guilt of original sin. There's a certain habitual disorder that is in the soul of infants, and because of that, there's an obligation to punishment that they have, right? There's an obligation to punishment because of the sin which is inherited from Adam. Like all Catholic schools teach this, so it doesn't really require actual sin in order to say that there is some sort of punishment for sin after this life, right? So they wouldn't necessarily follow that, the motions of concupiscence in infants before the use of reason, that these motions are somehow sinful in these infants. So yeah, I'm not sure what the sort of minor premise would be there, but yeah, everybody agrees that there's a certain guilt of original sin that infants have. Okay, what did Turkish pirates do to Palamas? I keep hearing this reference. Do you know what it means? Okay, yeah, you're really funny. Yeah, you're really funny. Okay, so advice for people with scruples/OCD. When it comes to OCD, OCD is a medical disorder, and um, there's it's a way in which the natural sciences are able to help with dealing with underlying habitual issues, and then also any sort of disorder in your faculties that's more of like a physiochemical level. I mean, that's just like a medical issue that could be treated, or one could choose not to have it treated and deal with it in other ways. But when it comes to scruples is a spiritual disorder. It's not merely something which is medical. So with scruples, there's not really a how do I put it? There's not really a universal way of dealing with it. It's a very personal thing. Each individual kind of has different circumstances which lead them into scruples, different triggers for it, different types of obsessions that are had. So the best way of dealing with it is going to be a prudent confessor, prudent spiritual director. I'm just a guy on the internet, and my advice, if general advice, is probably not going to be usefully and most efficaciously applied in your life, except by somebody who is a director of souls. Does it mean I failed the Eucharistic fast if it's snowing and snow follicles fell on my tongue? Okay, thank you for the super chat. What material/author would you recommend for the issue of conciliarism, issues of Council of Constance and Basil, Hac Sancta, and Dudum Sacrum? Okay, I actually was just reading about this. It's very interesting. One, like from a sort of theological perspective, to get the classical arguments, there's actually translated into English, Juan de Torquemada, his work, A Disputation on the Authority of Pope and Council. It's kind of cool, and if you read it and you look into the endnotes from the introduction, there's a lot of good resources which are referenced to there. So that's a good suggestion right there. Another one would be it's translated into English, so don't be scared. The Sacrae Theologiae Summa, I believe it is their 1B on the Church of Christ and on Holy Scripture. If you look up Constance, if you look up Constance, it has sections where it goes over the different responses, and it again, if you look in the footnotes, it gives resources and backing to those. So that's sort of like from a theological perspective. And then also, I would suggest third, a very good 3-volume series on the history of the church to kind of give you like the historical perspective. It's going to be in the second volume. Let's see if it can load. It's just called An Abridgment of History of the Church. and it's edited by Jedin, who was a pretty famous church historian in the 20th century. And it should be the volume that's like, it says 4 through 7. I can't remember what the exact name of it is. It's like Medieval and Reformation Church or something like that. If you flip through the table of contents, you should just be able to go to the sections on constants and read through that. But yeah, those would be some good beginning places to look through. Okay, so how does the person of Christ have a material and distinct human nature that the other divine persons don't have, considering opposition is only from relation? Well, this is when it comes to when we're talking about any sort of distinction following from the opposition of relation in God. We're talking about in the divine nature. We're not talking about like everything which is somehow united to the hypostases. So I hope that's helpful. I don't know what else to say. That's just like not the principle only applies to the divine nature. And yeah, I mean that's really, I guess, all that there kind of is to say. Sorry, I couldn't say more on that. How I can making the priest to more explain the thing, because when he talking fast, I not understanding almost nothing. Okay, thank you for the super chat. Mr. Wagner, do you have a PO box? Also, which pizza dip should Catholics eat with cheese pizza? No, I don't have a PO box, but when I move to Bismarck, I'll probably get one. I don't know how does getting a PO box work? Like, are they super expensive? I don't want to get a PO box if it's like $500 a month or something. I'm assuming they're not too expensive. But let me see. How much is a PO box? Oh, between $4 and $115 a month. Oh, that's not bad at all. Okay, yeah. I'll get a PO box when I'm up in Bismarck. Then you can send me the like ricin in the mail or whatever you're gonna send. What pizza dip should Catholics eat with cheese pizza? I mean, I think with cheese pizza, you just don't have a dip with it. That's just my personal opinion. Love from Jakarta. Okay, thank you. Okay, how to understand seemingly quite physical manifestations of God in the Old Testament. I really don't think it can all be interpreted as visions. Catholic stance. Yeah. So this is the stance that is taken by most of the Latin tradition. Would be that there is it's not only something which occurs in the intellect of the individual. There are some visions which definitely are in the intellect of the individual, but the Latin tradition in almost a wholesale way denies that all of these are somehow visions in the intellect of the receiver. These would normally be some sort of external manifestation or sign of God in the material world. Whether these are sort of personally, united to angels, or they're kind of more like what we think of as like holograms. There's not complete agreement on it, although I do think it's more likely that it's personally ordained by angels. But yeah, I don't know of anybody who says that it's just images in the intellect of the divine writer, divine author, or whoever else is seeing it. Okay, going to visit the relics of St. Thomas Aquinas tomorrow. Any document of his or others that could help my understanding on relics and veneration. God bless. Oh, St. Thomas on relics. That's a good question. That is a really good question. Off the top of my head, I'm not actually thinking of anything like written on St. Thomas's view of relics. Let me see. I guess his section on Dulia, maybe? Yeah, his section on Dulia and Latria, which would be in Sentences, Book 3, Distinction 9. And is there something in the Summa that I'm just completely missing? Oh, yeah, I'm an idiot. There is an article of this on the Summa. It'd be Tertia Pars, question 25, article 6. Yeah, I'm an idiot. Yeah, that was my fault. Okay, I wonder. Okay, let me see if there's anything else that I missed, because my memory is failing me. I don't think there's anything else I missed. How do I argue against people of other religions who try to cite miracles or healings as proofs for their religion? Is it better to say they aren't real or to say they don't truly mark the religion as God's legate? Yeah, so those would actually be, the two responses. On the one hand, it is pretty clear that in a lot of religions, their miracles are just like super fake. They're like super fake. They're just like stupid, super fake. Like I'm gonna lay on the bed of nails, or whatever other dumb sort of like pseudo miracles that a lot of these religions will have. So like, yeah, in a lot of cases, it's like, okay, dude, that's obviously fake. That's stupid and fake. Okay, so yeah, on the one hand, you could just say like it's fake, or at least that it has insufficient evidence. I would say that would be fair for almost all of them, because really the only religion that has, very exhaustively sought out, very clear and unequivocal evidence for all of her miracles is the Catholic religion, right? You can go and you can look at the blood of Saint Genarius. It's not that hard. You just go and look at it. You can you look at videos of it. It's not that hard, and so on and so forth with a lot of the other investigations that have been done into various different miracles. Which is, I was talking with somebody about this. We really need to do a better job of collecting these in a systematic way, right? We need to collect all of these different miracles in a systematic way with all of their evidences. I think this would be very useful for apologetics. I think if somebody was like, I'm making it my life's work to make a 10-volume, set of the exhaustive evidence and arguments for and against and responses to the objections of all of these different miracles that have been claimed throughout the history of the church, especially in the modern era when we're able to authenticate them in a much more clear way. So, yeah, I mean, on the one hand, yeah, you could say that at least they're not real, they don't have sufficient evidence. And if they insist, or they somehow provide some sort of evidence that, maybe you're not sure about, or maybe, heck, you think it's real, you could say that, this isn't going to point ever to the religion as authentically coming from God. Like a lot of these miracles, for example, and this is the example I always give, the difference between a healing and a Eucharistic miracle, right? A healing, what does a healing signify? Well, a healing signifies that, God, loves the person and wants them to, overcome some sort of physical ailment. God could do that to pagans if he wanted to. There's not really any sort of necessary connection between, the sort of petition from the individual and their religion and the truth or falsehood of their religion, right? There is not that connection between the two very clearly. But when it comes to something like a Eucharistic miracle at least is going to have some sort of connection with the theology of the priesthood, this theology of the sacraments. So it's going to be much more particular in showing the truth of the religion at hand. If Islam or Buddhism or Judaism or whatever else was true, then God would not give a Eucharistic miracle, but he could, give a healing or something like that. So, yeah, both of them can be used in different sort of conversations with people. Okay, I just don't want to. I don't want to answer the question about. Yeah, sorry, man. I apologize, John Smith. I just not about. I just don't want to answer it. When I standing up before the priest finished sitting down is disobeying or a-okay? Also, why gay marriage sin? Okay, thank you for the super chat. Dogma, how's it going, man? What are your thoughts on Cardinal Serapondo's double justice theory not being formally condemned to Trent and the DTC saying his positions were not heterodox? Yeah, my kids drew all over this book. To be honest, as I've thought about this more and more and more, I just kind of sit back and I just say, I don't know. I don't know. It's I've seen good arguments for both sides. I think they're very historically complex arguments, and I just at this point I just kind of don't know. I think that there's historical circumstances that lean towards the fact that it wasn't. I think the text of the council kind of leans towards it being. So I honestly, I could be convinced either way, and I think that what would be required for me is I think I need to read a lot more of Sarah Pondo's text itself. I think that would be very helpful. So yeah, I'm just kind of at the point where I don't know, but also I'm also at the point where it kind of just doesn't matter to me. It doesn't really matter to me, because really what I'm concerned about is, okay, here are what the theses mean to indicate. Here is the teaching of our chief doctors and the chief schools within the church that have been permitted to continue, right? These are the ways in which we look for what is acceptable or not. So you kind of just have to ask the person, like the person who's trying to espouse these views, like, okay, well, do you agree with this thesis, this thesis, this thesis, and this thesis on these terms? And that seems like to be the more important question for me, rather than trying to infinitely lawyer over a past figure who may or may not have been excluded, but definitely wasn't excluded by name. Good pre-Vatican II works against dialectical materialism. I don't know. You said we'll enjoy stuff for God's sake and beatific. Is this like a wife loving her kids to make hubby happy because hubby likes it? Kids for husband's sake. Dude, could you state things in different terms? Like, it's not that hard to just ask the question like this. You said we will enjoy things for God's sake in the beatific vision. Is this like a wife loving her kids to make her husband happy because the husband likes it? The kids for the husband's sake? Like, you could have framed it like that and it wouldn't have sounded awful. Okay. I just don't like the way this was phrased. Okay. It's like it's sort of like an infantile way. I just really don't like it. Anyways, would this be like a woman loving her kids in order to make her husband happy? I mean, her husband isn't her supreme end. So if that was her ultimate end in loving her kids, was making her husband happy, then that would be disordered, right? I mean, that could be sort of like a consideration, which is done, but that's not the ultimate end. Like God himself is the ultimate end of all creatures. So we love everything for his sake. Like you can show forth in a sort of in a dampened way, in a sort of lesser way of like, oh, I love this for the sake of that. As long as you're not referring that as your ultimate end, to which you order all things, then no, it's fine. As long as you're not doing it in a disordered way. But if she's somehow loving her kids and then her husband's her ultimate end, like, yeah, that's obviously disordered. Okay, rank. Bro wants the rank. Well, what do you okay? What do you want from me? What's next? I'm gonna do like the tiers. Like, you want me to do a tier ranking list for 20th century theologians? Okay. A tier is Shaban. B tier is Franzlin. C tier is Lagrange. You didn't ask me to explain, so I'll just leave it at that. Thank you for reposting my post praising. Okay. It was a funny post. It was a post praising Netanyahu, saying like he was really cool in like in an interesting way, and I thought it was funny, so I reposted it. Sorry, it was kind okay. It was kind of funny. It was like in a sort of ironic way, so I had to repost the tweet praising Netanyahu. I didn't think. Yeah. Anyways, you're welcome. Do you think St. Thomas or St. Chrysostom is more accurate with the issue of the I in Romans 7:7, i.e., is St. Paul speaking from the state of the Christian or the Jew under the law, and why? I think that he is speaking about the Christian. To be honest, I think that he's speaking about the Christian. And my reasoning for it is simply when you are comparing Romans 7 and 8, right? I think that the natural reading of Romans 7 and 8 is that Romans 7 is talking about the struggle with concupiscence, right? And how the law is incapable of overcoming concupiscence. But then you get in Romans 8, it's saying, okay, well, then there's these two options. You could either walk after the Spirit, empowered by the Spirit, not by the law, right? Not by the mere obedience of precept, but actually by grace, which is able to overcome concupiscence, so that we do not obey the concupiscences of the flesh, and therefore we walk after the Spirit and have eternal life. And then there's the walking after the flesh. That's the other response that could happen, which is what the fleshly Jews did. So I do think it's actually talking about. I do think it's actually talking about the Christian. It just, I don't know. It just flows. It just, I read it. It's kind of like intuitive to me. It just flows better in the argument of Romans when I read Romans. Like, I'm sorry. I hate to be that guy of like, oh, it's intuitive, but also St. Thomas said it, plus ratio. It's that's just kind of how I'm reading it. Although I guess technically it really doesn't. Okay, I also think technically it really doesn't matter. I mean, it really doesn't matter to the argument of the epistle. The same argument would follow in either case. So, layman's rule. Thank you for the $5 super chat. No gooning 14. Dude, we need a total. Honestly, guys, we need a total moratorium on saying the word epistemology for like 500 years. I swear. Just like nobody is allowed to use the word epistemology for like 10,000 years. Okay, I'm banning when we take control. We take control. We're banning the word epistemology. Now, if we ever get a Wagnerite pope, I'm gonna ask him and be like, hey, it's gonna be like Jacques Maritain and Paul VI. I'm gonna be like, hey, can you make a sort of encyclical excommunicating everyone who used the word epistemology or epistemological? He's like, what is okay in theological debates? Do all things come down to epistemology, or is this just fideism? Like, what is this supposed to mean? Oh, does it come down to epistemology? No, we actually talk about a lot of things beside epistemology. Okay, and then how also would we have even theological debates between people who are both Catholics in this case, or who have the same sort of understanding of the authority of divine revelation? Like how would this even occur? I don't know. I'm sorry to clown on you, no gooning 14, because I'm pretty sure but actually, I'm not sorry for clowning on you. I just hate that word. Do you think the apostolic authorship of the Dionysian corpus can be defended? I mean, I think a lot of things can be defended. So it doesn't really say much that I think it could be defended, but sure, I think it can be defended. I don't agree with it, but if you want to argue for that, then you can go ahead. Okay, I mean there's a difference between a proximate end and an ultimate end, right? Because the end is that which is intended in a moral act. Okay, so if I am, loving my wife, there's a sense in which my wife in that act of love is a end of that act of love, right? But the ultimate end is that which you subordinate all things to, right? Because an end is that which you intend. So you can intend something proximately, like the act itself, but could also be directed to a further end. So when we say that, one must act in all things for the sake of God, we're not necessarily saying there aren't proximate ends. We're saying that these ends are subordinated to even higher ends. Does that make sense? So it's a false dichotomy to say, oh, are these people ends or means? Well, it's kind of the fact that they're both, just not an ultimate end. Why is Lagrange in C tier? Is it because he's French? Well, Shaven and Franzlin are both German. I don't know. German-aligned Jesuits are kind of cool. They're just kind of cool, okay? The German-aligned Jesuits are kind of cool. The French Dominicans are kind of cool. Spanish Dominicans are kind of cooler. But the German Jesuits, they're just awesome. So, and I know Shaban's not a Jesuit, okay, but he definitely was extremely influenced by Jesuits. That's like all the German Jesuits make the most people seethe. They make everyone seethe. Because Kloiken, I think Kloiken was a German Jesuit too. They hate Kloiken. People who know Franzlin in modern theology usually don't like him. Shaban, he's usually given a pass. But that's because most of them don't actually read his handbook. They read kind of his more devotional works. Kind of like Lagrange, they'll read his devotional works and be like, oh, these are so beautiful and awesome. They're never actually read or his spiritual works. They're never actually reading like De Revelatione or his Summa commentaries. But the German Jesuits are just really cool. And Shaban's just like super, super cool. So that's my tier ranking. Then Franzlin. Okay, there's two types of eclectics. I'll put it like this. And I'll explain myself why I put Shaban ahead of Franzlin. This is just kind of I know everybody's going to mention, if you know it, everyone's going to mention the grace controversy thing, but let's just ignore that, okay? When it comes to these two types of eclectics, one type of eclectic kind of reads the entire tradition, and both of them read the entire tradition, of course. They read the entire tradition, but then they're kind of like choosing within the tradition, trying to do a synthesis within the tradition. And then there's another type of eclectic who is reading the whole tradition, and then they're trying to like push it forward by giving, unique solutions. It's totally fine to give unique solutions to old problems. Like, that's cool. As long as there's not a common sentence to where the conclusion is regarded as certain, like you can, if there's only a common opinion or there's a differing of opinion amongst different authors, like you are totally at liberty to do that. But Shaban seems to be, at least for me, for my reading of both of them, Shaban seems to be the first type of eclectic, Franz on the second type of eclectic, and I just prefer the first type of eclectic. Like, that's just my disposition. There's nothing wrong with being the second type of guy, but my disposition is just that the first one meshes better. So, sorry, guys. Does the argument follow that infallibility is absolutely necessary for the church's doctrine? Because without it, there is no room for error, and thus we could only have opinion and not faith. Not necessarily. I think this would actually be extremely problematic because this would remove, unless, okay, I'll put it like this. There was a specific charism which was given, there's a specific charism which was given by Christ to the apostles and their successors. There's a specific charism and gift of infallibility to where they far exceeded both the old priesthood, the priesthood of the old covenant, the magisterium of the old covenant, and also what was passed down through the patriarchal and paradisial revelation. Because remember, the response to revelation is faith. Okay, the response to revelation is faith. The charism of infallibility is not present in every single dispensation of the passing down of revelation. Because remember, there's not only revelation in Israel, there's not only revelation in the church, there's also revelation going all the way back to paradise. There's revelation in the patriarchs. There's revelation remnants, which were somehow included in different areas of mankind after the flood. And it would be, I think, extremely problematic to argue in every single one of these cases that they heard from a divine legate with the gift of infallibility. Right. So just kind of from this perspective, wouldn't seem to work from the history of God's dealing with mankind. But I would especially say because in Catholicism, we have authentic agents who are able to, elicit the assent of faith to us without the gift of infallibility. For example, your bishop. Your bishop is able to do that, but your bishop does not have personal infallibility. So I would just disagree. Yeah, I would just disagree. I mean, I'm open to hearing otherwise. Like if somebody has a different perspective and they're able to convince me of another opinion and I'm missing something. But I've thought about this a lot, and that's kind of the conclusion that I came to. St. Bonaventure also holds the same implicitly in Romans 7 total Western doctor victory over the Greeks, ? We love St. John Chrysostom, though. I would be interested to see what I've never really looked into what the various different opinions are on Romans 7, like throughout the history of the church, kind of beyond like what everybody kind of knows about the different opinions through St. Augustine. And then, there's St. John's opinion, St. Thomas, he lists them. Like beyond that sort of surface level, I don't really know much about, the development in the East of different readings of Romans 7 or anything like that, or the development even in the West. What effects of baptism remain in the believer after mortal sin? Oh, this is a really good question. So for those who don't know, I actually wrote an article on this, something similar to this. So if you go on my Substack, there is a related article on this. But the effects of baptism remain in the believer after mortal sin. Okay, so there is obviously there's 3 effects to baptism. The first effect, actually, there's kind of more to that, but they'll generally fall into these 3 categories. So there is the mark, the baptismal character. So the baptismal character, it gives some sort of participation in the priesthood of Christ. So the baptismal mark or the baptismal character remains after mortal sin. So the baptismal character is not effaced. Two, there would be membership in the church. So one is made a member of the church. So membership in the church is not lost by mortal sin or even by private or occult heresy, schism, etc., but only by either excommunication, public heresy, or public schism. Right. These are the only three things that would separate one from being a member of the church. But even after membership, they would still remain a subject to the church. That would remain after sin. And the third thing would be the effects of grace. The effects of grace, the forgiveness of sins, right? The forgiveness of the entire temporal debt. These are things which, are effects of the baptism fruitfully received. So when it comes to these effects, obviously sanctifying grace is lost by mortal sin. Obviously, one incurs, uh, punishments after mortal sin. So really, it's mostly going to be the first two. Although in the third, in a qualified sense, we could talk about continuing fruits insofar as sanctifying grace has a wide range of effects. And just because it has been formally removed doesn't mean that all of these, different effects are, removed as well. Like, to give an example, let's say one motivated by sufficient grace were to go and start becoming a frequent prayer. They pray every single day, at 7 a.m., let's say, and that's an effect of sanctifying grace in their soul. Now, if they lose sanctifying grace, it doesn't mean that they'll all of a sudden just lose the habit of praying at 7 a.m. every day, right? Or the same could go for any number of, like sins against chastity, for example. Somebody habituates the fact that they don't fornicate, that, and this is from sanctifying grace. Like, just because they've fallen into mortal sin doesn't mean they'll just start wanting to fornicate instantly. So yeah, there are, and I think this is something that a lot of people have had a hard time articulating. And that's kind of part of the reason why I wanted to write that article. A lot of people have a hard time articulating the fact that there can be effects to grace which are in the soul, to where when one falls into mortal sin, there's sort of these latent habits which are still present within the soul, which keeps somebody in a sort of like civil virtue. Obviously not meritorious condignly for eternal life, but there's still these sort of latent habits which make reconversion actually easier for the individual, which is why when you have people who leave the church, they're actually much more likely to return to the church than somebody who just never was in the church to begin with. Okay, so when are doubts against the faith sinful versus a temptation? When they are entertained. So if you accept and entertain these doubts rather than them just being passing, then they are sinful. Okay, Lagrange's Summa commentaries are what converted me to Catholicism. Awesome. We love Garrigou Lagrange. Eating venison backstraps right now. Awesome. W. David. We love David. Okay, this is a good question. I'm gonna write. Okay, so I promise that I want to write notes on this. Let me see. I'm going to write it down. Do an article on the CCC, temporal punishment, vengeance, etc. question. Okay, because somebody asked me this before, and I wrote them a response, right? And it gets a little bit complicated with like a specific like exegesis of the Latin text of the Catechism in order to comprehend what is being said right there. So what I want to do is I want to actually like write an article explaining it. I'll make it, obviously obviously Junior, you super chatted me, so I'll just make it like a free article. But yeah, I will promise I will write an article for that sometime in like the next week or so from the notes that I already have. I don't want to answer it off the cuff. Okay. I want to get through some of the other. Wagner, have you been reading the Wallenberch? If so, do you enjoy them? They seem really well read on their Protestant contemporaries. Yeah, I've read some of them. I've read a whole bunch. What I want to do, actually, I think would be a good video idea. Wait, where's my copy? I have a copy somewhere. Oh, it's all the way up there, I think. Oh no, here it is. So actually, I have a copy of their. Here you go. Their general tracts. My favorite part Boom. It's really cool. I like it. It's very gentle though. Let's be gentle with it. So yeah, I mean, I've flipped through certain sections and read certain chapters in here. Um, I've come to enjoy just buying the original text and reading them like in a little book rather than on a screen. I like it. Um, and I've liked what I've enjoyed what I've read. My favorite is in their special tracts when they discuss like in brief form all of the differences between Protestant and Catholic authors. I think it'd be really cool to turn that into a video. Although there's like dozens and dozens of different topics that they cover, so it would be kind of a long video. But I think that would be very helpful for people to give my thought. Not necessarily give my thoughts on it, but actually just kind of give what they say, and maybe leave. And maybe I'll give my personal thoughts in some other context, but just kind of say like, okay, this is what an expert in the time said. This isn't just me speaking from my own authority, but somebody who has experienced in the polemics between the two. This is what they said. I think that'd be really helpful. Oh no, Catholidox. Somebody's. Oh no, did somebody ban him? I don't see him. Dog, come on. Okay, I want to answer more normal questions. Miser Eckhart. Okay, I don't really want to talk about Miser Eckhart. Intellectual property. Okay, I really don't want to talk about the piracy intellectual property thing. Just everybody just gets mad about it for some reason. Like I don't know what it is. I don't know what it is. Okay, it's like, can we just have a calm conversation about intellectual property and piracy? Have a calm conversation about it. Each put forward our views and our arguments, and we discuss. Oh, that's a good argument. I never saw from that perspective. Oh, let me think about it. Oh, that's good. Oh, this author says this, that author says that. Okay, awesome. Like, can we just have a calm and civil conversation about, like, it's literally, this is not like the freaking end of the world, the issue of whether intellectual property exists. How far does it exist? How far does it extend? This is not the end of the world, guys. We could have a calm conversation about it. But every time you talk about it, people are just like, you're a thief. You're stealing from people. You're an awful person. And the other side just like, you're an idiot. You don't know anything. So I don't know. I hate conversations like that. It'd be one thing if it was like a super consequential thing. It's like ultra consequential. And this is like a make or break thing. But this is like a tertiary question of like moral. This is like a tertiary casuistic question. Okay. This isn't like the biggest question in the world. So just settle down, guys. It's not a huge deal. I don't care. I will, if I'm wrong about piracy, okay, the punishment for it is all of the money that I've lost helping people pirate my stuff. Okay. I've already paid for my crime, right? If I'm wrong, then so be it. Okay. I mean, I'm just convinced in conscience that I'm not wrong. Okay, dude, I've already explained it to you. I'm not doing your circle thing, okay? We're not doing this. I post my articles on Substack. What is entertaining a doubt, though, Wagner? Okay. Do you know the difference between having a thought and then entertaining that thought, like giving into that thought? Like, you just like reflect on your own thought processes. That's the difference. Okay. Okay, David. David's awesome question on usury. There is a certain interview which will be coming out on Thanksgiving break. So you guys are gonna be out there, like just envision it with me, okay? You guys are gonna be out there on your long car ride up to see your family on Thanksgiving, right? It's a huge long car ride. You're like, dang, I'm really bored. I really wish Wagner gave me something to listen to on this car ride. I have on that I think it's going to be that. Now I'll do it like that Wednesday morning. So that Wednesday car ride, you'll have me. Okay, I will be with you. Don't worry, I'll be with you. So on Wednesday that morning, I'll be releasing an hour and a half long interview that I completed, I think, like a week ago on issues of Catholic finance. And we talk about usury and interest there. So we answer that question in detail. So just wait. Okay. That Wednesday, it's going to happen. Dude, let's go. Converted from Lutheranism. St. Optatus is your confirmation saint. That's awesome, Rob. We love to hear it. You're just asking if my opinion on piracy is safe. How would you propose a reunion to Inquisitor on the question of whether God hates anything in the baptized and justification? I'd be interested to see your thoughts on Puda's upcoming video on whether this is a just schism. I mean, I'd have to listen to Puda's video. Whether God hates anything in the baptized and justification. I mean, that's like a really long question of like how would I propose a reunion to him? I mean, honestly, like if I were to propose it, okay, this is like my methodology. Like if I were to just set the terms, I would just go to the post Tridentine Augustinian authors, right? Like those in the Augustine school, like Berti. I would go through and I would draw out their theses. I think there's also like the 23 Augustinian theses as well. I would draw out these theses and I would just say like, okay, let's go through all the issues. These are what the Augustinians say. Like, what are your thoughts on this? Right? I guess that's kind of the way in which I would do it. I think I would just go through the Augustinian theses, but going over every thesis from the Augustinians on concupiscence and on justification, that's just not something I could do off the top of my head. So I will actually, if you DM me, because you have my DM, if you DM me, I will send you the sections from Berti on justification if you need it, because I have all the volumes. Are the Diamond Brothers the two witnesses of Revelation, or are they low-key heretical? Stop saying low-key. Thoughts on Ioannis Wiggers? Dude, Wiggers is really good. What if reading a Catholic theology book gives me temptations against the faith? Well, then just don't read them. Please pray for my wife, daughter, and I. She's pregnant with our first baby. Also, any good recommendations on Catholic political philosophy? I'm reading a lot of Catholic contemporaries. Yes. Okay. So, Connor, what you need to read is Open Up. It's called Thomistic Philosophy. Man, I'm starting to get a little sleepy here. By Henry Grenier. Okay, go to Isidore.co so you can get a nice little piracy of it, or you can go on Lulu. Lulu has the good one volume of Grenier. I print it, so I get money from it. If you go, it has the good 4-volume one rather than the stupid, like the good in 1-volume one rather than the stupid 4-volume scan ones that suck. So Grenier, go to the section on political philosophy. It's really good, and it provides like one of my favorite treatments of it. I've actually been thinking about writing an article against National Socialism from Grenier, basically using what Grenier says. Been thinking about doing that. Okay, how many minutes behind? I'm only 2 minutes behind. Does God love us for our sake? No. I don't even know if De Lubac's view of nature and grace is novel. I'm pretty sure he was just a normie Augustinian on it. By Augustinian, I'm talking about the Augustinian school. Is that a pretext for his Eucharistic ecclesiology? I don't know. What do you think of the book Apologia pro Marcel Lefebvre? I have not read it. But I want to learn though, Wagner. Well, I want to do a lot of things, dude. I want to do a lot of things. If that's causing you a temptation against the faith, then sorry, bro. I mean, that's just like the reality. There's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of stuff that a lot of people want to go. A lot of people they want to go to the beach, but there's immodestly dressed women there that cause them to sin. So they just don't go to the beach. Okay. I mean, that's just like a lot of people. They want to do something. It's an occasion of sin, and they know that they're going to fall into sin from it. So you just can't do it. Like that's just a relatively common thing. Like if you have a crack addiction, you should just not go around crack. Like that's a pretty like I don't have a crack addiction, so I can go around crack. Heard about you from Anthony and Rob. We love Anthony and Rob. Okay, this is a good question. This is a good question because the diamonds. Oh my gosh, erg. They quote this stuff on Jocose Lies as if sarcasm is a jocose lie. No, a jocose lie is when you are attempting to deceive another person. You're attempting to deceive another person for the sake of humor, like for the sake of a light reason. That is a jocose lie. A sarcastic joke, you are not attempting to deceive somebody because everybody knows that what you are saying, materially speaking, is it has some sort of like lack of proportion between, the ideas which are put together. Like those are two completely different things. A sarcasm is not a jocose lie. I wish Fuentes was a Fed. Want to explain some of the senses in which inherent justice is imperfect, or you could talk about how strict judgment / examination. I don't know. I think the best way of looking at it would be, I mean, there's enough. I guess one. Okay, just off the top of my head, one would be there's a certain imperfection of duration, like it's something which has a degree of mutability and could be lost. In that sense, it's imperfect. Two, it has an imperfection as to the scope of the elimination of evil in the soul. So it doesn't eliminate the second first motions of concupiscence. It doesn't eliminate the possibility of venial sin. It doesn't eliminate when we receive the infused moral virtues, for example, it doesn't instantly eliminate all of the averse habits, those vices which we have, which we are disposed towards from our past life. It is not perfect insofar as it in itself does not remove the obligation of punishment, but must be joined to the satisfaction of Christ. And then also under strictness of examination, this is another thing. Under strictness of examination. Yeah, under strictness of examination, one would, and it's from what I mentioned at the beginning of this video, from the non-reciprocal relationship between the stain of sin, the obligation to punishment. Under somebody with the stain of sin removed that does not have their punishment satisfied for, they will fail under strict examination. Like they will go to hell under strict examination, right? Obviously, we know that that would be against the that would be against what would be fitting for God to do. According to some, it would just be against what God's fitting to do. I would also say that that would be a manifest injustice to allow that situation to, continue to damnation in hell. But sort of in a divided sense, sure. But yeah, I guess those are like four senses that I can think of off the top of my head. I'm sorry if that wasn't clear. Getting kind of sleepy. Um, okay, my director says otherwise, bro. Then don't do it. Then don't do it. Why are you asking us? Okay. So I have scrupulosity. Oh, what should I do, Wagner? What should I do? You should get a spiritual director and listen to him. Oh, Wagner, but you said something that my spiritual director didn't say. Who should I listen to? CF original answer. Okay. Don't listen to me. If that's causing you scruples, just don't listen to me. Okay. Hmm. Any advice on avoiding the temptation to constantly reflect on why I believe? Yeah, make an act of faith every day. and pray to God for the graces to be able to avoid those temptations and remove occasions of it. Acts of the virtues, removing temptations, and impetrating God. Those are three things that should be able to get rid of any sort of those temptations that you have. And like in anything, not just in temptations against faith, but anything. One, you go, you find out what your occasions are, which are causing you towards this vice. You remove the occasions. Two, you make an act of the virtue. So whatever virtue you're trying to exercise, you make an act of it. And three, you pray to God for the grace. And also you could join these things with mortification and other things. Thoughts on Fenton? I love you with Fenton. St. Thomas Aquinas disagreed with you on Jocose Lies. Okay, dude. Good book to get a brief look at. Oh, yes. Everybody must go to Amazon and get the... Here we go. Everyone must go to Amazon, give 5 stars, A Brief Guide to Mental Prayer According to the Mind of St. Ignatius. Millions must get this book, okay? I'll put it in the... Oh my gosh, dude. How exacting does an examination of conscience have to be for a valid confession? Does length of time, since confession, or other factors affect this? I mean, yeah, it would affect this. It absolutely would affect this. But yeah, it would just simply be like by a moral estimation, what is in keeping with a proper spirit of contrition for one's sin, what would be in a sort of proportionate manner sufficient for the reasonable man to understand that he would be able to, list whatever mortal sins that he has. That kind of would be like, it's not, there's no like you have to go for 10 hours a week or whatever like that. That's just like, it's a common estimation thing. It's a moral weight thing. Okay. Sleepy now. Hour 20 minutes in. I think I'm going to go. Okay. Hope they all have an awesome one. I will be back Wednesday. On Wednesday, I will be interviewing Joshua Charles. We're going to be going over some interesting stuff about saints in the midst of the crisis in the church. Well, crises in the church in the past, and what we can learn about becoming saints in the crisis in the church that is now. So I hope that you have an awesome rest of your day. And as always,